Investing in cars has become a very common trend in recent years. This McLaren F1, for instance, used to cost £600,000 back in the day. Now this is a multi-million-dollar supercar. And the same goes for many other cars such as the Jaguar E-Type or Toyota Supra. These cars were fairly cheap investments, but now they are fetching huge sums of money. So what's next? Ever since its launch, the Lupo GTI has been a fan favourite among young driving enthusiasts. Its chuckable handling, sporty styling, and decent power has actually made this car a pretty desirable car among enthusiasts. A few years ago, this car would have cost £2,000 or £3,000. Now you're looking at between £5,000 to £7,000 for one of these, and I think that these are going to rise even more. After all, it is the spiritual successor to the original Golf GTI. EP3s are often very modified cars because they have the K20 engine, which can easily build 1000 horsepower reliably. However, that means that stock examples are under high demand. So if you find a stock one that hasn't been modified, that basically means you're sitting on a potentially very good investment. Even examples with over 100,000 miles are still pretty good investments. The market for 80s JDM cars is pretty hard to get into. All the good stuff has shot up in price, except for these. These FBRX7s remain absolute bargains. In fact, you can find restored examples for less than £10,000 if you look hard enough. And if you keep them in good condition, you could be looking at a £20,000 or £30,000 car in the future. This one has less than 50,000 miles on the clock. British motoring journalist Mike Brewer says that the best investments are fast forwards. Now, one I think will rise up the most is this, the Ford Capri. This car is a legend. It was highly favoured among stunt drivers back in the 70s and 80s. It was rear-wheel drive and packed a V6 up front. This car is just unbelievably cool. It's not that well made, but it's still a brilliant car to drive, and it's a great car to have. And one day, these will go up in value. The R129SL is one of the best known Mercedes SLs ever made. This car was highly favoured back in the day by Mercedes' more affluent customers. This car was packed with tech. It featured the engine from the Zonda, except for this one, this is the S500. And considering this car's legendary status, I think that this will someday be a hugely good investment. Currently, these sit around the 10,000 to 15,000 mark. In fact, you can even find them for less. In fact, here's one with pretty low mileage for less than £7,000. The Renault Clio 182 is a legendary little hot hatch. This thing was a sporty version of the Clio, the successor to the Clio Williams, except this one featured more power, 182 brake horsepower, which in a car as small as this makes this thing a little go-kart. This thing was incredibly fun, it handled well, it sounded great, and I think that this is going to be a great investment. And they are still very cheap. The 968 was the successor to the 944. It sat just below the 928 in the Porsche line. It was sort of a smaller GT car, and it had a 3-litre engine that produced 240 horsepower, which made this car perfect for competing with cars from Japan like the Toyota Supra. This car has a 4-cylinder engine with 3 litres. It's pretty good, it's a pretty good car. It sounds good too. And I think it's a great investment. Now £15,000 is a bargain. S2000 was Honda's little sporty convertible. This car featured the higher output version of the K20 used in the Civic Type R. This thing was rear-wheel drive and featured sporty styling, and this thing was the perfect competitor to the BMW Z4 and Porsche Boxster. This car is actually going to be a very good investment because this was one of the very few rear-wheel drive cars that Honda ever made, aside from the NSX. These are still available for less than 10 grand. The Vauxhall Monaro is an interesting car. This thing is basically a rebadged Holden, or if you're from America, a rebadged Pontiac. This car is basically a 4-door muscle car. It's got a 5.7 litre V8 making near enough 400 horsepower, or you could get a 6 litre which is a bit more expensive, and I think that they've already gone up in price. However, I think these are going to go up in price next, especially manual ones. Here's one with a manual gearbox. The DB9 was Aston Martin's Grand Tourer around the late 2000s, early 2010s. This car is absolutely stunning to look at and it's surprisingly cheap. Manual cars have skyrocketed in value much like the Monaro. However, automatics are quickly being snapped up by collectors, and that means that they are on the up as well. So if you buy one of these now, this pretty little thing is going to be a pretty good investment. An Aston for sub 25k is a bargain. Out of all these cars, I think I would take this, the RX-7. It's a fun car, and it's often slept on. The Japanese car market has been booming the past few years, so I think that these are one day going to skyrocket in value. So if you buy one now, you could be looking at a pretty solid investment. So if you want advice like this, please subscribe for more in the future, and until next time, goodbye.